I will. Hey, good evening and welcome back to another stream. I am your presenter, Kyle Hooten. You are watching Alpha News. Tonight we are joined by Daniel Di Martino, a return guest to the show. We had him on last summer. As some of you may know, Daniel escaped socialism. He was born in Venezuela. He now lives in America where he studies at Columbia University. He's pursuing a PhD in economics. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Absolutely. So we're very glad to have you back on the show. We've got a lot to talk about with the Biden economic program, the COVID recovery that is still ongoing. But before we do any of that, I want to just brief the viewers on your life story. I know we talked about this a year ago when you were on the first time, but it's such an important story. I want to talk about it again. You're from Venezuela.
That's right. So I am 22 years old. I came to the United States when I was 17 after finishing high school in Venezuela. I obtained a full ride to study in Indiana University. So I got my BA in economics there in December 2019. And then I moved to Kentucky, where I'm at the moment, to work at the University of Kentucky for a few months. And then I started the PhD in economics at Columbia, but I've been doing it online because of the pandemic and all. And so I'm moving to New York City in the next couple of months. And that's what I've been doing.
Very exciting. Very exciting. So I forget, you'll have to remind me, do you still have family in Venezuela or have they all left the country now?
I still have some family. More people have left. But I have, an uncle and some cousins. But that's pretty much it because my parents have left. My grandparents have left. I don't have siblings. And I have some other cousins and uncles and aunts who have also left because the situation is just unbearable.
Yeah, I remember about last year when we were talking the first time, the media attention that Venezuela was getting in the US was quite remarkable. People were very aware of how bad the situation is, but it sort of lapsed out of the public consciousness. Could you speak to how the situation still is?
Yes, now the situation is even worse than when we last talked because now Venezuela is hit by two terrible crises, the crisis caused by socialism and then the crisis caused by the pandemic itself. And Venezuela was already a country that because of the government nationalization of all the healthcare, all the control of the medicine industry, there were no drugs, there were no hospital beds in Venezuela before the pandemic. And now with COVID-19, so many people are dying just in their homes. People cannot also, so were never able to socially distance in Venezuela because their social distancing meant starvation, right? So the pandemic is just running free in the country. There's no vaccination either, except for the friends of the Maduro regime. The vaccines that they're gonna give away are the Chinese and the Russian vaccines, which we know already from other countries' experiences are not even working. Right. So it is very terrible what's going on, and it's scary, right? More people have left the country. Now a lot of people are actually coming to the United States. They're flying to Mexico, and then from Mexico they're crossing the U.S. border because there's no way. Venezuela doesn't have a U.S. embassy anymore. Because of the situation with Maduro. So there's no way to request a visa. And so what people do is that you can fly without a visa to Mexico. And then from Mexico, they cross the border and request asylum.
Absolutely. And we all saw how hard some sections of America were hit by the pandemic and the associated economic downturn. So I can only imagine how dark that would have been in a country that at starting had people eating garbage like trash, refuse to survive. And, there's not much lower you can go, but unfortunately it went lower.
Yeah, people said in Venezuela very many times that I can't get worse than this. Let me tell you, it can always get worse. There's no bottom. It can always get worse. You can, the bottom is going back to the times of, 40,000 years ago when humans were living in caves. That's the bottom.
If you ever run for office, that should be your slogan. Daniel, it can always get worse.
It can always get worse. So both safe,
Absolutely. Yeah. But fortunately in America, it looks like things are getting a little bit better after the pandemic economically. Of course, you study economics, you've seen the consequence of socialist economics, sort of firsthand. Tell us, what's your assessment of how we're pulling out of this COVID situation?
I honestly think that the economy is rebounding faster than I expected, at least on jobs so far, but it's slowed down tremendously in the last couple of months. At least relative to the rest of the world, the United States is rebounding faster. relative to Europe, relative to Latin America, of course, relative to Asia, to Africa. The United States is doing better on GDP, on employment, on everything. But it's not doing as good as it should be, right? There we have the most job openings in US history. We have more job openings than before the pandemic, but we still have more people unemployed than before the pandemic. So there is a mismatch between labor supply and labor demand, and that's hurting businesses, right? It's hurting businesses because if they don't have the workers, they're not going to open. And if a business doesn't have the workers, it's not going to expand. So this has indirect consequences on everybody, right? Having more businesses working, having more people making money is good for everybody. And if we have millions of people who are living from government subsidies and businesses who want to hire them who can't, then we're not going to have the businesses that we need. We're going to have less innovation. We're going to have more long-term unemployment that has terrible consequences for the people who are out of the labor force. We know from different studies that the longer you are unemployed, the less likely you are to get a job in the future. And then the lower you're going to make. So we're going to see the consequences of these policy mistakes for decades.
A sober warning. And, you can kind of see this a little bit when I just drive through the city that I live in. I see fast food restaurants offering bonuses for people to simply come in and interview. I ate fast food the other day, which was disgusting, but in the bag, there was a pamphlet telling me why I should apply for a job there. I mean, it's recruiting like we've never seen before.
McDonald's is doing that here.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if that's in your part of the country as well.
Yes. So I'm a little bit of an economics nerd. So when I go into restaurants, I ask the people if they're hiring, how much they're paying. And they think, because my age, that I'm interested in like getting the job. And I kind of like, I'm like, no, I'm just asking this because I'm curious. And they don't believe me, even though it's the truth.
Yeah, little do they know you're far beyond McDonald's.
Yeah. So I've seen, Panda Express, that is down the road from where I live, they pay $15 an hour for their servers. And Chipotle is giving tuition reimbursement of up to $5,250. That is a lot of money. That is enough to pay for one semester at the University of Kentucky next year. So they're paying for half of their tuition if you have to pay full tuition and don't have any scholarship, plus their wages, right? Which is about $10 an hour, they told me. These are good jobs, for that level of effort, right? You don't have to have a college degree for any of this. So I think this is a fair payment. And this is not New York City. This is Lexington, Kentucky, right? So it's not also like the cost of living is huge. You can definitely live with that if you were to work full time. But people are not getting them, and that's a problem, right? Because it means that then they're going to take longer on our orders. They're going to be able to attend fewer customers, and that's going to affect everybody. Fewer people are going to be paying taxes. Fewer people are going to be saving for their future. More people are going to be dependent on the government and consuming our tax dollars. So that has consequences for us.
It's so interesting how for years we heard this fight for 15 narrative. They were trying to get to the $15 minimum wage. And now that a lot of places are voluntarily paying 15, nobody wants to work the jobs because of course, government incentives.
Yeah, let me share my screen and show you how, this is exactly having a consequences. I'm going to show you the graph of the total number of job openings that we have right now, which is the most in US history. It's here it is. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. We have, right as of April, this is not updated as of May, it has shot up to 9.3 million job openings in the United States. Before the pandemic, the most we ever got was 7.5 million. So we are nearly 2 million above of more jobs open before the pandemic. And then the number of people unemployed.
They're being created, or is that strictly because people aren't working jobs that already existed?
So these are jobs that companies are saying that they would hire somebody immediately if they applied, and they just don't have anybody who has filled the position. Now it could be because of a skill mismatch, but why is it different? Why do we have 9.3 million people unemployed, 9.3 million jobs open? And so we have over 4 million more people unemployed than before the pandemic, but we have over 2 million open jobs than before the pandemic. So we have millions of people who were working before and are not working now, and those jobs are still there. So why aren't they going back to work? If these jobs are paying more, if these jobs are ready to go. And that's why then there's the complaint about the unemployment benefits, right? That because of the unemployment bonus of $300 a week, $300 a week is, a lot of money. It's over $1,200 a month. So there's usually more than 4 weeks in a month. And that is on top of the state benefits. So if I live in Kentucky and I get $200 a week of my Kentucky benefits, I'm actually getting $500 total per week. It's better to earn $2,000 a month not working than $2,500 a month working, right?
Exactly.
It's just, I don't blame the people who are doing that, because if I was in their situation, I'd probably do the same and focus on doing something else in my free time.
Right. You could develop some other skill set. You could have a hobby. You could catch up on sleep. I mean, it's not their fault, as you
Spend
say.
more time with your family. Maybe you have a new child, everything.
Exactly. Really astonishing. Another issue that people are talking about is inflation. I know we were talking a bit about this before the show, but what's your take on inflation? Because I see a lot of fear mongering and I see a lot of people minimizing the issue. And I want to know your take.
Okay. So I think that there's a lot of fear mongering. I think we have to be serious, and we always have to be on the watch to keep inflation stable. We are going to have higher inflation this year, and we're already having it. That's true. I believe that we're going to have inflation of around 5%, excluding gas and food prices that are usually volatile and depend on international forces. 5% is a lot. The Federal Reserve's goal is 2%. But we also have to recognize something. Inflation over the past 10 years has not been 2% either. Every year it's been less than 2%. It's been like 1.8, 1.7 on average. So the Fed is now taking the philosophy that they'd rather help people get back to work at the cost of some temporary higher inflation, because we've had less inflation than we've wanted in the past. So we're going to catch up on that inflation loss, basically, in exchange of having more jobs and having a faster growing economy. My concern about all of this is that the Fed doesn't understand that the fundamentals of why the economy is not growing faster is not their interest rates, it's not their policy, it's fiscal policy, it's the federal government, it's the Biden administration. It is regulation, it is taxation, it is unemployment benefits, it is it is regulation on unemployment benefits and taxes. It is not the Federal Reserve's interest rate, right? And I think that that's the problem. So I hope that as inflation increases, the Fed is going to be willing to pump the brakes and start now having a more restrictive monetary policy. The Biden administration is not going to like it because when interest rates go up, the debt is going to cost more to service, right? Because this is what a lot of people forget about this, but if the Fed increases interest rates, all the bonds that the federal government owes in debt are going to increase in their interest rate too once they come to expiration. And most of them are short term, so they're coming on expiration at this moment. This means that the deficit is going to balloon even more as the Fed increases interest rates. So Biden does not want that, and it's going to force him to perhaps cut spending or increase taxes. But we'd have to do that for decades, He's bad that we didn't do it later. He's going to be forced to do it soon. And that's where I'm concerned, right? I'm concerned that the Fed will respond in time. I hope they do. I think that they're independent. So let's see what happens.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding you properly, you trust that the Federal Reserve will do its job, but you're not sure if the Feds, Biden, the politicians will play their part.
Right. So if the Fed does its job, we are going to see some inflation this year, but we're going to go back to 2% next year and thereafter. But because the federal government is not doing its job well, we're going to have very low economic growth, and we're going to take a very long time to return to the pre-pandemic economy. And that's my concern. It's the economic growth part. Because economic growth, even though it sounds like an abstract concept, it is what people make, right? It is their yearly income. It's fulfilling jobs. It is benefits. It is being able to quit and find a better job. That's what it is, a good economy.
Okay. One thing that people always bring up in these discussions about inflation is the amount of money that's been printed. You see that Biden has come up with several trillion-dollar spending initiatives that rival the cost of the war in Afghanistan. Are you concerned about this new inflow of currency into the economy?
Yeah. So, well, the federal government, when they spend, they're not creating money. When the federal government does it, the Fed is the one that creates money, and the private banks. When Biden has passed all these spending packages that have been totally unnecessary, that have paid money to people who honestly do not need the money, like the stimulus checks. Most of the stimulus checks went to people making over, who were making money, who were not unemployed, that didn't need it, that were making more or the same as they did before the pandemic.
I saw a new article too that said it was something like, I don't know if this is true, but I saw it out there on Twitter land that like 30% of the money went to fraudulent claims. People were just claiming, business loans that they didn't need. It was getting sucked out of the system.
Yes, I don't think we will know yet the exact amount, because there was fraud with the PPP program, even though I supported that program. There was fraud with the unemployment benefits. There was fraud with the stimulus checks. There's fraud with everything, right? And that's a problem. But even if there had been no fraud, you shouldn't pay people who were not struggling, right? That's not the role of the government. And a lot of people were complacent with that, including a lot of conservatives, because they were benefiting themselves. And that's not okay. We shouldn't give away our principles because we're being bought off by a leftist. That's how they gain power. But so the only concern with those programs is that because they're increasing the debt so much, then it means that we soon are going to experience higher interest rates, because there's going to be less confidence in the US economy. And that's going to result in what? Less investment, less jobs, lower wages. And eventually it's going to cost us in higher taxes, right? Because they're going to have to repay the debt at some point. And there is a point in which the debt as percent of our economy reaches a tipping point, and we find ourselves in the situation like Greece, when investors are saying, no more, we need the money back. And if you don't give it to us back, we're going to sue you, and you're going to have to, increase taxes tremendously, like Greece did. And that's the problem. Some economies, yes?
I don't mean to interrupt, but is what happened in Greece even possible in America? Because Greece and America are very different. And I feel like confidence in America goes beyond just the balance sheet. I mean, it's a global superpower, whereas Greece is like a small Mediterranean country. Can we approach that point?
Yes. So it's true that the US has more confidence and it's a larger economy. And that just means that the tipping point is farther away as related to Greece, right? It doesn't mean that there's no tipping point. There's a tipping point always. The US cannot, it's just a mathematical reality that the United States cannot get into unlimited debt. If we were able to get into unlimited debt as percent of our economy, then there wouldn't be any concern. Interest rates wouldn't matter, and nothing would matter, right? We would just spend infinitely. Well, that's not the case.
Where do you see that tipping point? Is this like a 5-year problem, a 10-year problem, a multi-decade problem?
There's a new paper that was trying to measure that was published by some Harvard and University of Chicago economists, and they estimated that tipping point based on the movement of interest rates and comparing to other countries at about 150 to 200% of GDP. Currently, U.S. debt is 100% of GDP, but it is rising very fast, and we're expected to reach 150% in about 10 years.
What does that look like on the ground then? If we reach that point, the confidence is lost. How does that impact you and I?
Yeah, it would impact us. The first step would be that foreign investors would not seek to invest in the United States anymore. And what would that mean in practical terms? Interest rates would go up. So it would cost more money to borrow at the bank. So Americans in their credit cards, they're not going to be able to consume as much. It's going to be more expensive to buy a car, to buy a phone, to buy a house. And there's just going to be fewer businesses being created, because most businesses are created by taking out loans, and businesses expand by taking loans from banks. If interest rates are very high, and banks don't want to lend us much money, then we're just going to have fewer businesses and fewer jobs. And that's what happened in Greece. And the federal government will then try to solve that problem by balancing the budget, but they're going to do it very fast rather than over time, which is what should be done or should have been done. And how will that look like? Maybe they will introduce a sales tax, because it's the faster way to raise money. And then everything will cost 10% more for everybody. And that's going to hurt us all.
Yeah, that's pretty grisly. And that's not that far away. You said we're presently at 100%. And these economists predict that around 150 or 200, we're going to start getting hit. I don't like those numbers. That's daunting.
Yes. So this is not, we're not going to turn into Venezuela, but we may turn into Greece, which, Greece is a country with 30% unemployment. Greece is a country where people make half of what Americans make today. And it is a stagnant economy. Yes, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful country. It has tourism, but people live off what they make, and and that's not going to look nice.
Yeah, this culture of prosperity that Americans are used to, where you can live off of part of your income and spend the rest on, investing or buying leisure items or having nice cars and lake houses, that's gone under that equation.
Yeah. Now, if we wanted to solve that, that can be solved, and that can definitely be avoided. The first budget fight that we're going to get soon is that for Medicare, because Medicare has a trust fund that's we pay Medicare X taxes from our wages, and then it goes to a trust fund, and then current retirees withdraw from that trust fund for their Medicare today. Because there's fewer workers and more retirees, then that money's never going to be enough. It's a badly designed system, a Ponzi scheme, you could think about it. Yeah, it's a government created Ponzi scheme.
It is.
And it's in this decade, it's going to run out of money. I believe that the latest estimate from the Committee for a Federal Responsible Budget and from the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, is that it will run out in 2024 or 2025. Which, if it's in 2024 at the end, they're probably going to have to discuss it that year anyway, because they can't do it in the last minute. Then it means that it's an election year battle. And they have three options. They have one option is to not do anything. Mm-hmm. If they don't do anything, then the trust fund is just not going to pay for hospital benefits, and people who are on Medicare are just going to be left hanging, and with medical bills of millions of dollars. I don't think they're going to do that. The other option is to get more in debt, and that's just going to fast forward this economic crisis that I'm telling you about and reduce investment and jobs. And the third option is to raise taxes and lower spending. And there's a lot of ways in which that could be balanced. In fact, you could totally balance Medicare and Social Security and all these trust funds and all the government programs if you just excluded high-income people and turned them into just a flat benefit for low-income elderly. But the Democrats don't want to do that because they want to keep everybody on the benefits. I remember Paul Ryan, when he was running for vice president, talking about his own grandmother, how, she was rich or something. And he was saying, my grandma doesn't need Medicare and Social Security. I mean, it's true. Why should, wealthy people receive Medicare and Social Security? It just doesn't make sense.
But there's this odd aversion to that idea. I don't know if it just fits into the left's like healthcare for all idea, or if people have just become so comfortable with the idea of Medicare for everybody over the last couple of decades. But if you even bring that up, it's like touching the third rail. People don't like it. It's a toxic issue. But as you mentioned, it's just a couple years away that we have to start having that conversation. And I don't see anybody in the field seriously discussing it.
And people think, that they paid for that, they earned those benefits. And it's true to some extent. But the truth is that the average person in the United States will pay about $250,000 over their lifetime into Medicare and will receive over $350,000 in benefits. So there's a gap. You're not really earning everything, right? You're getting a lot more than you receive, and not everybody can get a lot more than they receive. It has to balance out because the money comes from somewhere or someone. And that's not happening.
And there's a lot of benefits programs that people pay into and they don't receive anything from. And it seems like people are fine with that in all these other instances, but not with Medicare.
Yeah. So I think that the way to think about these programs is that we have just too many programs for the same goal: Medicaid, Medicare, Obamacare, children's health insurance program, so many things that in reality, if our only goal, I'm not being a person that is against all government or anything or against poor people. If our goal is to have a balanced budget to maximize jobs and wages and help the people who are least well off, then we should just combine everything, eliminate everything, combine it into one thing, and just help the people who are low income. And that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. I know we're kind of coming up on our half hour here, but we've got an economics guy on the show, so I have to ask about this. What's your take on the BlackRock scandal that sort of broke late last week? They're buying up these single family houses, supposedly so that they can rent them back to people that they've now priced out of the market. That seems pretty daunting to me. What's your take?
Okay, so let's start with something. They wouldn't be doing this if they weren't going to be making money, right? We all agree with that. This is a profit maximizing firm.
Right.
That's natural. Okay. It is true that there is a demand for people who want to rent single family homes. There was just an article about this, and it's happening a lot because not everybody wants to rent an apartment. You know, if someone wants to rent a single family home, where do they go? And that's why BlackRock is investing in that. So in reality, this is not really BlackRock. This is just more renters who want to live in single family homes. If those renters didn't exist, BlackRock wouldn't be buying the homes. So the problem that we have to address is not, if you were to ban BlackRock from buying those homes, somebody else would do it, and these renters would find somebody else to rent it from. It's not going to change absolutely anything, except hurt BlackRock itself.
But are people able to rent these homes back from BlackRock or from whatever organization at a lower price, and they would be able to just buy it? Like, is the rent going to be cheaper than?
Well, they just can't buy it and don't want to buy it, because to buy it, you have to have an initial.
Okay.
Or you have to tie up in a 15 or 30-year mortgage, and you're not going to live there for that time. Most people who rent don't want to live there for a long term. And we're living in an increasingly mobile economy where young people don't want to settle in the same place for the rest of their lives. And that's why home ownership is becoming less common. Not because it's not necessarily because people are less well off, but because our preferences as a generation have changed. So if we want to lower the price of homes, then the solution is to build more homes, not to ban BlackRock from buying homes.
Yeah.
And the problem in places like California, like New York, and even in some conservative places is that city governments and local governments are not allowing the private sector to build homes. Most of San Francisco is zoned for single family homes. Downtown San Francisco, when it really should be skyscrapers. Why should San Francisco look like a big suburb and not like New York City, like Manhattan, right? And because of that, the median home price in San Francisco is over $1 million.
Wow.
That's pricing out all the poor people of San Francisco. And that's why San Francisco has such a high homeless rate. So if we want to change this, we have to change zoning so that more tall buildings can be built in downtowns across America, and people who want to live in single family homes can live in the suburbs, and that demand for extra housing can go into buildings.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people share this concern for falling home ownership rates in America. People sort of recognize intuitively that home ownership is an integral part of the American experience. And this BlackRock thing, it scares people because, they hear that people will no longer be owning single family homes. But, until right now, I hadn't considered that zoning was also an aspect of this problem. And
it is the main issue. And it's not just zoning. There's city governments have requirements like minimum parking requirements where they tell businesses that if they're going to open or create a new, say, Burger King, they have to have so many parking spots rather than let them do what's best for the market, because they require so much excessive parking, so much more land that could be used to build more housing or more businesses is just flat out parking lots. That's why we have so many cities across this country where if you see them from the sky, it's parking lot, rather than have something that the market would determine. And that's a problem for traffic, for everything.
And then a lot of these same cities, they're very liberal. They want more green space. They want more walkable cities. And, they're advocating that with one breath. And then in the next breath, they're mandating this, asphalt sea that will never be walkable, will never be hospitable.
Exactly. It's ugly too.
Yeah.
It's horrible to just be around a city where everything is parking, and it's hard to walk the cities because of that. Cities like, Manhattan doesn't have that problem because Manhattan was built before zoning existed.
Yeah.
And that's why it's such a dense city. There are examples that could be followed. In Texas, there are several cities, I believe that Houston and Dallas are two of them, that have much less restrictive zoning and parking requirements. And because of that, they have some of the lowest housing prices among big cities in America. So it is an example. Some people dislike what I'm telling you. And let me tell you the counter argument to what I'm saying too, because they say that, Daniel just wants to abolish, and these people, the YIMBs, WIMBs, that's what we're called. Yes, in my backyard, it means. we want to end single family homes. And that's not true. What we want to end is the government mandating that everybody lives in a single family homes and nobody in a building. And because the government is mandating that everybody lives in a single family homes are extremely expensive, because for the same land area, you can build one home that you could build 10 apartments. And what's better, to house homeless people, to house people who are young people who want to rent in an apartment there, or making them buy from BlackRock and rent a single family home because that's all that the government allows? It doesn't make sense. It's worse for single family homeowners, it would be cheaper to buy a single family home if you allowed more buildings, right? Because there would just be more housing units for the same population.
I understand the argument. Personally, I would always want to live, I don't presently, but in the future, I would want to live in a single family home, develop more community, more permanency. But I do understand, what you're saying with you can house more people in a small area of space. It's a compelling argument. It's an interesting argument. And this is what I love about having people on the show that know a lot about economics is we start talking about, inflation and jobs, and we end up talking about urban planning. It's very interesting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me about that, because it's honestly bothered me how many people have talked about this who have no idea about housing regulations or planning or just how a market works, and they just think with the emotions, which I understand, but we cannot be like the left, thinking with the emotions rather than just analyzing something.
Of course. Before we wrap it up here, one of my last questions is there any other issue that you wish I would ask about, or any other perspective that you have that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now I'm one of the fields that I'm doing through my PhD is out of the economics of immigration. And so I'm talking a lot about high-skilled immigration, how to have a conservative immigration system that works. And, right now we have a border crisis, and a lot of it is because of Biden's policies. A lot of it is because
the White House is calling it now. They've moved away from the term border crisis. Now they're calling it the border challenge in their newest press.
That reminds me of college as an undergrad, because every time they said, you don't have a problem, you have a challenge.
Oh, that's so cheesy.
That was the thing. It was so funny. I'm like, oh, come on. But, there's a lot of evidence about how to stop illegal immigration, and people forget about the past, things that have worked in the past. In the 1950s, the United States was able to drop illegal crossings to nearly zero for many years. And you wonder, how did the United States do this, right? Why didn't the Mexicans cross the border illegally and all that, which was the main population that was crossing back then? Now it's not Mexicans, it's Central Americans. The reason was that they implemented something called the Bracero program. The Bracero program was an agreement between Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, the presidents during the 50s, and the government of Mexico that allowed Mexican workers to come through a visa program legally. They work here, for several months. They come back, they work here again for several months. And because they had a legal chance, illegal crossings dropped to zero. Why is that important? You say, well, but at the end, they're coming in anyway. Well, but if they're coming in legally, they're coming in they're not criminals. That's important. They're not going to bring drugs because they're coming and being filtered. So that's important. We're ending the drug problem. We're ending the crime problem. And more people actually stop coming illegally than they come legally. You actually reduce total immigration if you want it. Because if people know that they will never have a chance to come legally to the United States, they're going to cross the border illegally. Mm-hmm. What? You're going to deport them? Okay, they'll come back again and they'll cross again. That's what's happening. In fact, that's what's happening right now, because Title 42, the authority that the government has used since Trump and now Biden is using it's not a deportation. It's called an expulsion. They catch you in the border. They return you. It's not on your record. You have no legal bars at all. There's absolutely no disincentive to just
we've been calling
move 1 kilometer and crossing the other side.
Yeah. This is catch and release. I think Trump was calling it back in 2016.
Yeah, but he was the one who implemented Title 42 in the pandemic, because the goal was not to even process them because of the fear of COVID-19. But the consequence was that they just get out, and then they come back in again. And that's why we see so many crossings. It's not really 180,000 people a month. It's really like 60,000 who are crossing 3 times. And so that's an issue, right? If we wanted to stop that, we should allow some of those people, we should allow everybody to have some kind of legal chance to come, even if it's small, and they would be willing to wait, because nobody wants to pay coyotes, nobody wants to traffic drugs if they are regular people. That will reduce a lot of the illegal crossings, and Border Patrol will be able to focus on who? The criminals and the drug dealers, who are the people who should never get into the United States.
Right. Do you think people actually would wait? Because that's always a concern I have, is if it's quicker to go illegally, people will maximize efficiency.
Yeah, well, they would, because the benefits of coming legally to the United States are huge. The wage benefits, people make so much more money by being legal immigrants than illegal. An illegal immigrant will never become CEO of a company. Let's start with that. An illegal immigrant will never be able to become a well-known person or make a lot of money being a high management position. They will be just in the lower level of the labor force forever. They have a risk of deportation. They are exploited by employers because they don't have legal status. It is not a good situation to be in. They can't travel freely back home. They can't go back home and come back to visit their family members. So there are several estimates. If they had some kind of legal chance, even if they had to wait, like 5 years, that's good. But right now, they don't even have a legal chance. And because in the past, we've seen how this has worked with the Bracero program and the Mexicans, I think that it would work if the Central Americans and other people had that same chance, and that it would basically end illegal immigration as we know it.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's definitely an interesting proposition, and I think anything will be better than what we have right now, which is just an open floodgate. It's not working for anybody. You end up with young girls getting sexually exploited, drugs pouring across the country, hundreds of thousands of undocumented people. Not a good program. Anything would be an improvement, and I mean, we appreciate your perspective on that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm starting this a lot because I think something's going to be done at some point, and it's important to have a studied perspective that is not just let's increase border security, because border security is important, but we're never going to have a border like North Korea, nor should we, right? So there is always going to be illegal immigration unless people have some kind of legal path. Unless you wanted to have a border like North Korea and you just kill people, which is not really an option.
Landmines do stop people from
crossing. It's just human rights and all that.
The landmine solution, not probably the best idea, but and we really appreciate you coming on the show. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. If people want to keep up with your work, where can they follow you on social media?
Yes, I put this here. I put my Twitter on my Twitter handle and my name here. My Twitter is @Daniel Di Martino. You can also find my website, danieldimartino.com. And you can contact me there through my email or just DM me on social media. I also have Facebook, so I'll be tagged on this Facebook Live. And I'm happy to connect. I'm going to Indianapolis tomorrow to speak at an event. Then I'm going to DC next week. I'm traveling, trying to speak about these things, about Venezuela, about socialism, the economy, and try to, promote policies that help all Americans.
Not bad. Well, we always appreciate your perspective. It's so interesting, coming from Venezuela, being here, now working on your PhD. How long until you've completed that, by the way, the PhD?
I have 4 more years, so I've done 1 year, and it's a total of 5 on average. I mean, the first year was all coursework, then it's more coursework, and then it's 3 years of just research and publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and then maybe become a college professor and or work in in the government as some kind of advisory position. That's kind of my goal.
A marked improvement over most college professors we hear about these days.
Yeah, I view it also as a service to the conservative movement and to other students who, like me, never had a real conservative as a college professor. And I think it's important to have people who are socially conservative, who believe in economic freedom, as role models in schools. I think that's how we change the culture, right? We step up and try to do it, even if it's a hard path.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people talk about, fighting the culture war, or whatever term you want to use. You're out there doing it. We appreciate your work. To our viewers, follow Daniel. His Twitter handle's right there on the screen. And Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.